had an accident earlier today with a UAV, which is, of course, the subject of, was to be the subject of the presentation. And so he's not able to attend tonight, but he's promised to reschedule. So as a backup presentation, we have a presentation on architecture by the late Dr. Eberhardt Rechtin, who many of you recognize as one of the founders of system engineering architecture. And we have one of his presentations given right in this auditorium in January 21st, 2000, on systems architecture of organizations. We think this will be a legitimate and appreciated substitute. And so without further ado, we're going to go into this. It'll run a little bit long. It'll run about an hour and 10 minutes, shortened from an hour and 30 minutes. So I hope you enjoy this, and afterwards we will have a drawing for David's recommended book, Prey, titled P-R-E-Y, which is about, I think, swarms and bots and so on, by the late Michael Crichton, for those of you that are aware of his various movies and writings. So let's, without further ado, go ahead and roll the presentation. Thank you.
You tell the difference between electricals and chemicals without much trouble. They have different rules they follow, different laws they follow. Some of them follow Newton, some of them follow Boyle, some of them follow something else, whatever. All different. And they use different tools, different equations, algorithms, tables, charts, books, and whatever to solve them. The same thing is true between system engineering and system architecting. System engineering we have done magnificently. Professor Eisner here wrote one of the finest books on system engineering you could ever imagine. It meant that I didn't have to start there. He'd already done it and done it very well, and he did it in 1988. It allowed me to start off in architecting as a quite different direction. Because architecting has different tools. They're not the same by a long ways. The principal difference is this. Systems engineering is based upon the definition both of systems and of engineering. Now, what's the definition of engineering in the dictionary and most people would use, and used quite proudly? Definition of engineering is applying science and mathematics for the benefit of mankind. It's a marvelous objective. It's a marvelous short statement. It says what it is. The key thing is it depends upon applying science. Now you have to go back one step and see what science in turn depends upon. Science, in two short words, is replicable measurements. Think hard, replicable measurements. If you can't measure it, it's not science. Some people say if you can't manage it, if you can't measure it, it isn't management. It's a mistake. There are some people that manage only by the numbers. Clearly a mistake, that management is far more than that. The key thing is that it's measurements, and the second key thing is you've got to be able to replicate it. Well, if I had to pick one part of systems architecting where both of those clearly are worthless, it's in organizational structures. There is no way that you can replicate any organizational situation and say, I'm going to do it the way AT&T did it, or even the way APL did it. You keep changing it anyway. I can't keep track of it. It isn't going to be the same tomorrow, certainly not with a new director, as it was several months ago. It'll be different. So even if you studied yourself, you don't have the data to know what the future looks like because the past doesn't help you very much. In the defense business, the Soviets, unfortunately, wouldn't give us all the information necessary to design a really good American defense system. They wouldn't. They weren't about to tell us. We told them most of the time through the Freedom of Information Act. They were the principal users. But a lot of good that did us, okay? So even if we told them what we thought we might do, and they told us what they thought they might do, they might not do it. They might deliberately appear to do it and not do it. Those are called black programs, okay? You think you thought something, but you didn't really. It didn't exist, but it did exist. You know how all these things sort out. So here we have a problem. There isn't any data, or the other guy won't give it to you, or worse yet, there isn't time. Somebody gives you a specification. I want you to build this spacecraft with a 95% reliability. Now, come on, you quality control guys. Tell me right off the bat, even if I give you a 90% confidence limit, how many flights you have to fly to prove with 90% confidence that it's 95% reliable. You're going to build 3, remember. You've got to fly damn near 1,000 flights to prove that you reached it. It's a meaningless number. 95% in small numbers doesn't mean anything. You're in trouble right off the bat. So you're going to have a hard time taking a lot of past data and concluding from that. You might have launched a total number of 100 already of all different kinds of satellites, that you're going to achieve this marvelous new thing. Cheaper, better, faster. There's going to be all those things guaranteed. That's the demand of the customer. Oh, come on. Prove it. With numbers, with science. You can't do it. The data doesn't exist. It's a real problem. You can't go and walk away and say, oh, I'm sorry, sir, but those specifications, I just don't choose to do. You say, fine, here's a guy will. That's the end of that game. Because a customer, what he's saying is that he wants it to be only 5 times as bad as a normal human being operation. As you all know, a human being is essentially set up so that we make about 1% error. If we're awake, interested, dedicated, and everything else, we'll still make 1% errors no matter what we try to do. We can't do any better than that, and it's more than good enough for us to survive, and that's what the objective was, so QED, it's 1%. Except we demand the same 1% no matter what the thing is, including the most complicated thing any of you have ever built. It's still got to be only 1%. The fact that it's got millions of times more parts in it, that you got no time to do it, a lot of other things, it doesn't count, they still want 1%. And they'll settle for 95. The launch business now is sick and tired of 95%. They want no less than 98 to 99%. That doesn't sound very far away until you express it in terms of failures per number. At 95%, 1 in 20 can fail, right? At 97.5%, 1 in 50. At 99%, 1 in 100. If you could somehow figure out how to do it with some confidence. Not only that, that has to be from start, not from some time when you decided we're ready to be counted. That's from the start, from the first launch. That's all you're given. There's no way that that can work unless everything that you've ever done before is perfect. You'll still goof 1% of the time, so that's the 99. I don't think we'll ever do any better than that. You should expect, when you launch, that you'll have runs of no failures whatsoever, almost most of the time, of 100. No failures in 100 flights. There are very, very few programs I can even imagine that have gone that far. You get runs of 20 or 30 maybe, runs of 100. Something's the matter someplace. And the Apollo, that's what they did. I've told some of you that story of the analysts early on in the Apollo program. I was one of them. We calculated how many people do you have to kill before you get 3 back if you do everything better than you've ever done before in every single element that we've got. Architecting put together in 1960. The number was 30. I'll let you figure out why we got 0. Okay? Give you an easy answer, 0 defects, but that's too simple. Okay? Now, we got that far. We began to see in our main systems, prior to thinking about architecting much, that we were building great successes and great failures and great stuff in between, and we didn't know why. There's a slight diversion. There's a similar situation going on now. People have asked me, because I used to be at JPL for a long time and I sort of know something about the space business, how come the Mars probes failed? The real answer is, we don't know. And that's the tragedy. We don't know. When we first designed the Deep Space Net, we designed it so there were almost no times when we didn't know. We maintained continuous contact all the time. In satellites, after the Mercury and other programs were finished, we finally put up the TDRS satellites, remember? So that you could look down and get continuous contact with everything that was going on, including the failure, and if you designed it right, even shortly thereafter, because communication stayed on, and you had a chance to see what went and in what order. but we knew why, and therefore we fixed it reliably. We could tell from that kind of information what it was and what it could not have been. In case you want to debate me with this one, all I have to do is pick up the last issue of Spectrum, where they analyzed in considerable detail the one of, I think it was the Mars orbiter, is the one preceding this lander one. And they showed there were at least 6 very good possible explanations, only one of which had anything to do with the distinguishing metric and English measurements. It need not have happened, as it turns out. The critical point was, nobody knows. Nobody was there listening. When it got on the ground, as you know, Mars also rotates, roughly one day, but not exactly. It doesn't take much brains to figure out, if you have only one station that can listen very easily, how often those two will coincide, and you should not have been surprised when they said, the next window is 3 days from now and 1 hour. And that's all they had. Typical example of where somehow they didn't do the system engineering for how to meet the better, cheaper, simpler, whatever, criteria. They should have instrumented the planet first. Easy. They should have put a deep space net around Mars. Synchronous satellites, TDRS. We could do it tomorrow morning. We know how to build them. We can probably take some of them off the line, the same damn things. And getting there is no problem. The propulsion to get to synchronous orbit around Mars is about the same as to get to synchronous orbit around here. Hard part's getting down and up. So you put them up, set them in place, sit there and listen to them. They listen to everybody's flying around down below, you know. Doesn't matter where they land, somebody's watching them. You could have told whether or not they bounced off the atmosphere, or they went into the atmosphere, metrics or not. You could have let the people in operations, who are always very conservative, know that it was okay to make this last correction, which they could have done, but which they did not do, for a very damn good reason. If any of you have ever been in operations, you know the last thing in the world you want is some high brass marching into your office. Here you are down at the Cape, ready to go, and they tell you, hey, I want to do something different. You shoot them in the head and go away. You're in charge. You're not about to do that. You're a damn fool if you do. If it hasn't been worked out, who in the hell is ever going to do what some character shows up and says ought to be done, including the R&D guy that invented this wonder, and even the honest to make an adjustment? Yeah, sure. Sit down and be quiet. We've done all this. We've done everything right so far. Nothing's been wrong. You got some bright idea about some company that told you English units. Well, what the hell does that have to do with my price of business? I'm going to do what I'm told to do. I'm going to do what it says right here, and it's number 57 on the line. I'm going to go right through that. You do exactly the same thing if you were in operations. I've been there. I've done that. I've refused. And when I was a CEO, I never went to launch because I didn't want to disturb a thing, even if I had bright ideas. Didn't make any difference. Well, at that point, I had done book 1, and people began to say that, yeah, there's something here. But the logical question from the students then, incidentally, if you want to learn, teach. I had a lot to learn. I was only 65. I had a lot to learn. And so they asked me, they said, well, this is great, but what do I do? What am I supposed to do? You say they're architects, and you give us all these insights. What am I supposed to do with them? You say simplify. Well, simplify what and to what degree? You know, all kinds of questions came up. That book doesn't answer those. It wasn't its intent. So write a book on what the tools are. It also helped to distinguish between architecting and engineering, because many systems engineers consider architecting sort of the front end of engineering. The fact that they're conceptually and mechanically different has only been a rather recent realization. They both do depend upon insights. The answers are always in the back of these books. We play the game differently. We give you the answers first and tell you to look at your problem through that perspective instead of giving you case studies. It's different in lots of ways. So that called for a second book. Well, it turned out I had time enough to do that, so I wrote the second book along with my partner and true co-author, Mark Mayer. Some of you may know him. Works at Aerospace now, was a tenured, I guess still is, tenured professor at the University of Alabama, Huntsville, which is another center of a lot of this kind of thinking. And he's now at Aerospace, working in Aerospace. He's working in the architecting group that has to do with the NRO. So for those that want to track him down, fine. He gives excellent tutorials. You should be able to, because the newest parts of the book he wrote. And they were to cover, the newest parts were to cover parts which the first book did not, and sometimes conspicuously I couldn't, one of which was software. So he picked up the software end of the game, which he knows far better than I. I gave up on software at about age 60, figuring these other guys are so far ahead of me, I'll never catch up anyway. I'll concentrate on what I know something about. So I didn't do that. He did. He also answered his own tough question he asked in the first class. That was, hey, when I go back to Hughes, these guys say, well, why don't you guys, architects, get out of the way so we can cut metal? We got to cut metal. We got to build this thing. We guys quit designing and shut up so we can get going. You keep calling a hold on when we're supposed to go because you haven't finished some damn full design or something. When can we cut metal? And he asked that me in the beginning. Well, I threw up sand at the time. I had a science study, which you tell somebody like that, because architects, many of them disappear right after the conceptual phase for different reasons. You had to find those out too. Well, it turns out, it took us only 4 years, and we did find it out, and Mark found it out, and he writes about it in the book. What it is something called progressive modeling. You never quit when you're an architect, nor does the modeling quit. Sure, there's a conceptual model, granted. If you didn't have that, you wouldn't know what you're talking about. But everybody models from there on. One of the best of the models, you hope, is the operating manual. Think about it. If you don't have a decent operating manual, you don't have a good model of what's supposed to work. You don't know how it's supposed to work. Another one much harder to determine is what is a model of the user, because you like the model of the user and the model of the equipment to work together. Try to model a user. That's very, very difficult. I gave you one parameter, only 1% reliability. But I haven't given you all the rest. Desires, worth, value, all kinds of stuff. Not done. But at the very least, you ought to have a decent manual. And in between, there are all kinds of others. Each stovepipe is going to have their own models of what they're doing. They have to, or they couldn't build anything. They have to know what they're going to build, which is a model, if you will, in order to keep on going to the thing you actually do. So you're always modeling. It's progressive. It gets more and more, to use a software term, gets more and more refined. In other words, closer and closer to the end. At the very end, if you're very good, you have a good operating manual. The guys there know exactly what to do. They don't want all this dinking around with brass outside. They know exactly what to do. It's a precise model. It's going to do certain things. You've done everything you can to think about it. You've done everything you can to eliminate all the errors. You've done all the testing. You've done everything else. It is then very, very refined and very narrow. Simplify, simplify. Simplify is grand at the beginning. But what the hell did you mean at the end? Well, you also meant simplify, simplify, simplify in the testing. Do you know what you tested and why? Or is it just a list? There are lots of things that flow through. So modeling never quits. And the guys in manufacturing want to get started saying, fine, you should build a model of what you think it looks like on the manufacturing line. That's okay, I'll check it. The job of the architect is to maintain consistency, not to do all the modeling. Do some of the modeling, but there's modeling all over the place. It was a very, very hard question, and it took a long time to sort out as to what the hell we were talking about. But we did. Now, the third book had a quite different kind of thing. As it turned out, I wasn't sure I was going to live so long to write a third book, particularly on management. I don't like management books, unfortunately. I've never found one I liked. They always seem to be written by people who've never managed anything. And what I was finding out in architecting was no two situations are replicable anyway, and there's no data to work with anyhow. Surveys don't mean a thing. They're only a snapshot at best. I was going to run things the way I thought I should run them, and somebody else could run them the way they thought. I didn't want a management book. I particularly didn't like decision theory. Decision theory says, here's a decision, it's a yes-no decision. I say, I never heard of things. I never made any such decisions. I always made decisions in sets. A lot of interconnecting things. I'd be stupid to make single decisions one at a time, minute manager style. That's stupidity. You've forgotten almost all the rest of the world in doing that. You can't do that. Typically at aerospace, I would make 5, 6 decisions, interrelated, against a standard that I had set to get some objective accomplished at high level. I decided at one time and published all at the same time, same set of things. I made none of those decisions first, second, or third. I made them as a set. So much for decision theory. So I didn't want to write a book on management. I hope I haven't written a book on management, because if I have, then you should reject it the way I reject all the rest of them. So what was I going to do? The CEOs of other companies are coming and telling me, gee, those first 2 books, they're pretty interesting stuff. I wish there was something like that in my business of organizations. Well, I'd been there, and I thought, well, maybe so. One of them said, that, you know, these other books are really graduate courses in good management when you think about it. And I said, well, that isn't surprising. Some of the insights that are in there came out of that. So that was a different motivation altogether. I somehow had to figure out how I could help managers. Up to this point, I was trying to help engineers, architects, and so forth understand architecting, what you did, how you did it, and why you did it, and when it was missing and when it wasn't, and what the results should be. That's fairly straightforward stuff. And now here I was stuck with a management problem. And as I said, I didn't want to write a management book, and I sure as hell am not going to write memoirs. So between those two, what form is left? I decided to do what I advise all my students to do in any reader of the book. Go to the back of the book and look at the lessons first. Don't try to derive the lessons. Go look at the lessons. So I thought, okay, I'll go back and look at all the lessons learned, if you will, the insights that are in the back of all these books. There's about 100 in each book, and they're different, and they're differently organized depending upon the purpose. That's a detail we can talk about later if you want to. But I went to the backs of the first two books. And I asked myself, well, is this going to do any good? To my astonishment, the answer was plenty. Plenty of good was going to come out of that. There were all kinds of technical insights that applied directly to organizations, because organizations, what do you know, are systems. They're groups of different things which produce a greater result. That's why you get together. That's why you organize. Okay? Oh, well, it's a structure. Well, then it ought to be subject or doable with these kinds of techniques. And what surprised me was they were. Now, of course, you come up with some more as you think in your own experience, and structures that in organizations are somewhat different than other kinds. All right, that's fair enough. And so you get some more. So about 30% of the insights that are in the first book actually turn up in the last book too. And about 20% of them are in the second book, which also turned out to be in the last book too. And all the rest of them are original for that particular field. Now, how did I know they were right? I got together a group of 4 of us that had been high-level executives, all retired and all with nothing much to do anyway. And we sat around and thought, well, let's tell stories to each other, and that's where the insights came from. So it was reviewed, if you will, on a monthly basis in a grand time where we all had lunch together and chatted about the old days and reviewed briefly whatever was coming up in the book, for the hell of it. It was called The Book. At about that stage, one of them was better at this than anybody else I know, at writing metaphors, came up with a metaphor with what I was trying to say. And so I want to first point out these things as I go along. If you can believe it, all this was introduction. Now, every machine is different, naturally. This one appears to be here. Ah, good. Okay. The 3 basic premises. First, organizations are complex systems. Goody. That's my business, okay? Every system has an architecture which largely determines what the system can and cannot do. I ran into this one in a backwards way. I almost wrote the reverse book, and that would have been terrible. I had found out that if you will tell me about an organization, I only want good ones, that has all its objectives straight, it has good management, the people know it's excellent by whatever criteria you want to use. They're all pretty good. And everything is in order. I can tell you what that corporation cannot do. Now it hits everybody like a wet towel in the face. Who's this squirt telling us what we can't do? We're an excellent company. We've always been excellent. There's no reason why we can't be excellent. So it's a different world. So we'll do that excellent too. That's fine. Oh, come on now. You know that a basketball player is not necessarily a good violinist. Might make a good president. I don't know. You're going to have to decide that later. But you're used to that. You don't expect them to. You have certain strengths and certain weaknesses. Okay, so that shouldn't have been a surprise to everybody, but it was to them and to me too when I found it out. I was really quite good at it. It was my first job at Hewlett-Packard. I went there as chief engineer, and I saw they were trying to build systems. And I went to Hewlett, who Daniel threw me out of the office, by the way, and told him, sir, don't try to build systems here. You can't build systems here. And he was angry as hell, I tell you. He wanted to go up against IBM and all the big computer manufacturers, you know, do all this stuff. And here was this guy, hardly been there a couple of months. He's telling me he couldn't do something. Man, Hewlett-Packard is one of the finest corporations in the world. It's got a marvelous structure, marvelous objectives. They're all in order. They all work. It kind of mucked them up a little bit recently. But in the long term, it's a marvelous place, high morals, everything I'd always wanted in a corporation. And didn't have to say nasty things about it. Only good things could be said about this corporation. And here I was telling it couldn't do something. He didn't like it, not at all. He wouldn't even listen to much of an explanation. And it was because of the original objectives and the way they did business. The idea in Hewlett-Packard goes way back to their first garage, when Hewlett and Packard built the first oscillator. And they managed to get it going. And ever since then, they used exactly that same model and architecture over and over and over and over again for 5,000 products. They all worked magnificently. A single product, you couldn't beat them. They grew 20% per year in every parameter, including profit, for 40 years. That's a pretty sizable growth. They went from next to nothing to be in the Fortune 500 to probably Fortune 10 by this time. Man alive, you're going to tell them they don't know how to do systems? Obviously they can do systems, but not on that model they can't. And I'll tell you the example that told it to me in the simplest possible fashion. They used to have, probably still do, a video program which all newcomers were supposed to watch because this described the HP way, as it was called. Later on, someone said the HP dogma because they thought it was too strict. But anyway, the HP way. And one of the ideas was what you do with a memorandum. If you get a memorandum, and this guy was very specific about it. There's absolutely no question what he was doing. He's a professional guy, written professional script, and this is the HP way. If you get a memorandum, you put it on the left-hand side of your desk carefully and line it up well. If nobody calls you on it, you move it to the right-hand side of the desk. Don't bother to read it, okay? If nobody calls you in a week, toss it. That example alone was sufficient. It was a very accurate description of what they did. Individuals did everything. They concentrated on everything from how you build it technically all the way through marketing. The best degree was an engineering degree plus a master's in business administration. You had to know the whole thing. They funded you so you didn't have to have those kinds of worries. But as individuals, you worked as individuals, you built things as individuals, and you could build things up to about the value of $10,000 per unit pretty well. It was so well that they could expand from, when I first got there, something like 12 divisions to now it's uncountable. It's over several hundred. Because every time that a guy would get a new bright idea in an existing division, they'd split him off and make him form another division. But the worst was the memos. I was an old government guy, and I knew that if I sent you a memo, and you're on the distribution list or at the top of the list in your case, I expected you to read it, okay? You might not like it, but I expected you to read it. And all you were was in the final end where it said names. I decided that you needed to read that particular thing. I meant you and maybe scattering it around the audience. I expected you to read it. If I knew that you were going to toss it in 2 weeks, I would have been furious as a system guy because that thing had system implications, and if people didn't read it and understand what to do with it, we were in trouble. I like to say that the red tape that other people criticize is the lifeblood in systems. You count on it. There are ways of writing memoranda. There are ways of doing things that depend critically on pieces of paper, or maybe email now, that you send around, okay? And you expect the distribution list people to read it. You can even do bank shots. There's a grand bank shot where I put you, the director, on as a reader, but not as addressed to you. Of course not. I don't want to criticize you under any circumstances. I sent it to him instead, but you're on the distribution list. It's really a bank shot. Boom, okay? Now, a good guy in the bureaucracy understands rules like that. There are 50 of them. And how you write a memo. A memo is crucial. If he sends a directive out, I'm damn sure that everybody in this outfit reads it. And he expects you to read it, whether it's addressed to you specifically or not. And in this here now company, they were tossing them out, including ones from the director. Didn't make any difference. That was their instruction. Do your own thing was the motto. You're never going to build a system that way. You can't. You can't hold it together. Paperwork is what holds systems together. Paperwork is what defines the interfaces. Paperwork is what the architect puts out. And anybody that calls it red tape in a derogatory fashion has never tried to build a system. You build a system on paperwork, and I told that to Packard. He was much friendlier. Hewlett, he was furious. So they tried it. So they tried to tell them the next rule, and that is that the reliability, the failure rate of something is directly proportional to its cost. What about all the statistics? That's a damn fool thing. Say, what do I mean? Well, be a little more specific. I mean that within a given context of how you do business and how you make things, the error rate is proportional to cost. Now that's a magic, isn't it? I'm a magician, but I'm going to tell you the answer anyway. It's directly related to piece part count. The Air Force found this out, and it was true over a 60 decibel range, from less than $1 million to $100 million, precisely. If they're all done in the same way, for the same purpose, the failure rate is proportional to the number of piece parts, and the piece parts are proportional to cost and QED. Okay, simple. Well, I tried that on Hewlett, and the second time he tried to throw me out. Well, they tried to build systems. They tried to build 100,000 instead of $10,000 units. Okay, so they try. You can't go up against, as an architect, you can't go up against the boss anyway. So what happened? I went in and told them, careful, you're going to have to change your warranty program. The 1-year warranty is not going to work. You're going to get everything back. You better make it 30 days. 30 days! Hewlett went through the overhead. He was madder than hell. He said, what do you mean failure rates proportional to cost? I get a Cadillac and I expect a Cadillac to have a Chevrolet. I pay more for the Cadillac and it's better. What do you mean it's going to be worse? You know, my logic didn't go very far until they built the systems and sent them out. And within only 2 months, the warranty period was made 30 days. Obvious, the stuff's going to come back, and it did. It flooded the joint in 1 month. It was 10 times higher failure rate than their usual 1-year warranty. They couldn't avoid it. They put a lot of 1-year warranty stuff together, and you don't get a 1-year system out of that. System weren't reliable. It goes to hell in a basket. Well, okay, so basic insights. It said that, indeed, you can take organizations and what they can do very well. Now, where did this crazy thing come from? The metaphor. Because this is the answer. It is the single answer. It's a grand metaphor. I'm glad that the guy suggested it to it. I didn't have too much trouble getting it through the publisher. It's okay. It's a good metaphor. Metaphor is this. Let's take a look at an eagle. An eagle is a high-flying bird. It's excellent. It is so good and so powerful and so strong that we all look up to it. Our national emblem is an eagle. The national emblems of many countries are eagles, sometimes even double eagles. And they're marvelous things. They fly high. They have magnificent eyesight. They're marvelous birds. We all look up to them and admire them. The metaphor is that an organization, an excellent organization, is like an eagle. And so the question posed is, why can't eagles swim? In other words, why can't organizations shift gears and go into another field? Problem. There are too many answers. Everybody's got a different answer as to why that can't happen, or can, depending upon how strongly you believe in yourself and your organization. You can say, I do anything. I've done almost everything. I play the guitar, I play the violin, I play the piano. I don't do some other things, but you know, who cares about those? And I've led organizations of all kinds. You know, I'm clearly excellent. I can do anything. Well, it takes a number of years, but you finally get the bright idea that you can't do everything. But the question is, why can't the eagle swim? A couple of reasons. Underwater, big wings are not what you want. Underwater, a beak is not what you want. Underwater, having perfect eyesight at 5 miles up of anything to the ground within a few inches is not much good underwater. Matter of fact, every one of my strengths is no good underwater. It wasn't the weaknesses that killed me, it was the strengths that killed me. There were strengths over here, but sure as hell not over there. The strengths became the weaknesses, and that's what caused it. And that is the answer at the back of the book. About all the rest of it all fits into that metaphor. So if you remember nothing else, if you call this book nothing else, call it Eagles. I call it my Eagles book, because it describes in very great detail where the problem is. You recognize that an eagle can't swim underwater. And so you beat on people a little bit, and the smart ones come back and say, come on. That's a dumb question anyway. Why would you want to do that? The response to that is, swimming is kind of a solution, isn't it? It's not the problem. You kind of made that into the problem by thinking you're going to have to train him to swim underwater or something. So that was, no, that can't be right. Because you can't train him to swim underwater. They can't do it underwater. Scratch your head and you wonder what to do. Say, well, I guess the problem is to catch fish. Ah, now we got a problem. Well, okay, so I got to catch fish. It wasn't swimming underwater, you were going to catch fish. And you said that the solution was to swim. Didn't you kind of jump to the solution before you knew the problem? And don't tell me nobody ever does that. We've all done it, we've all proposed and defended to the death solutions to questionable problems. Were they really there? You know, the Cold War is over, and who won the Cold War, which system won the Cold War, damn if we know. But not quite the answer. So he says to catch fish. And you presume that the solution to catching fish, the solution to ABM, was to hit something else with the same thing, bullet against bullet. That's a presumed solution. What was the problem? Well, how do you catch fish if you're an eagle? Well, you take these powerful wings, you come down dead out of the sun, lower than the Brewster's angle. Think of all the complexity. You come down and you snatch it off the top and take off. You pick up something at a dead stop zero, slightly underwater, and take off without drowning. Because consider what would happen if the eagle couldn't take off. He can't swim. He's going to drown. A very dangerous procedure, but they're very skilled at it. As a matter of fact, the front of the book, for those that have you, look at the front of the book, there's an eagle about to come down, about to grab a fish. That they do very, very well. Their strengths all match catching fish from above the water. Well, the critic still isn't quite satisfied. He said, well, suppose there aren't as many fish. Suppose the markets have gone down. Continue the metaphor. Suppose that's the case. Well, why is the solution necessary to swim? You want to catch more fish? Get together your buddy over there like every other species has done. Herd the fish into a narrow channel, and then everybody gets a feast. The whales do it, the wild dogs in Africa do it. Why can't the eagles learn it? They probably could if they didn't have enough fish and they didn't have any other option. They would start teaching each other. Smart enough. That's how they pass on from generation to generation. They pass this kind of knowledge. All they'd have to do is, if the fish get to be too few, gang up on them, drive the fish by scaring them with the big flapping wings and everything else going on. All the fish will tear off in some direction. Put the eagles in the right places, like to put lions in the right places, you know, the same thing. And all the fish will go swimming like mad over there into the shallows, where sitting there are 40 different eagles ready for breakfast. Okay? What do you mean they can't catch fish? They can catch more fish if they want to, but by using the strengths, not by jumping to some, if you will, damn fool conclusion like trying to make them swim. So that was the metaphor. Now, it's the proof of the pudding. There are lots of stories. I can tell the story of the 6 eagles to you. I can tell you lots of stories. Tell you to look in the back of the book and see all the answers as to what kinds of things you need to pay attention to if you're an architect. I can tell you about how at aerospace, when I first started, the first book has 100 heuristics in it, and I thought, oh, good grief. What's anybody going to do with 100 heuristics? They obviously can't memorize them all and keep them right in front of their minds, and everything they do, they're going to look them back and look at these 100 heuristics and over and over and over. To hell with that. Nobody's right mind is going to do that. Okay? How do you get out of that fix? So I coined another metaphor myself. This was the hardware store, and this is the way you use the back of the book. The back of the book has, of any of the books, has about 100. Those of you scanning it, look for Appendix A, and Appendix A, you'll see heuristics out the kazoo. These are all tested heuristics, which means that no matter where they came from management, from projects, from any of the many students, wherever they came from, I have cross-checked them by saying they can apply in at least 3 different applications that I know of. And unless they do that, I don't call them a heuristic or I don't call them insight. So that they're valid statements. Most of you, when you read them, will say it's common sense. More accurately, it's sense in a particular context. And if you learn that by coming up to a stovepipe, that's fine. If you learn it by being a system guy, that's fine. Whatever it is, you've come up and you have a technical base, you have an understanding of your world, you have an understanding of APL or I of aerospace or whatever. You have that. You're basing it on that. And it's what's common sense, what makes sense in that particular environment. That's what we're really talking about. When people say, what do you do? I just use common sense to get the right answer. Try teaching it. How do you teach somebody common sense? You can't. You can teach them lessons and tell them to try using them. But how do you deal with 100 of them? As I told you, I think, When I first started out, I thought 100 was too many, and then I asked the students to look at their own projects through this perspective and come back and tell me what they found. And then when they'd done that, to go back to their project and see, now that you've done that, tell me what further lessons you might think are in your projects. And when we stopped counting, I had 800 of them. Now, isn't that useful? Wouldn't you all like to know all 800? I'll start reading them off now. 800 here. You're going to be tired at least, if not sound asleep. It's just no point. What the hell are you going to do with 800 heuristics? And they're valid. They aren't some guy's assertion. We crossed assertions off the list very easy. They aren't plagiarized from somebody else. They aren't some reference which actually came from another reference. None of that. These are clean, simple, straightforward heuristics. The metaphor was the hardware store. Easy. You have a problem. You're at home, you got a problem. You have to fix a piece of furniture, or fix the lawnmower, or, good luck, fix the plumbing. Whatever it is, you got to fix it. Okay. So what do? You recognize you don't have any tools around to do it, so you march off the hardware store and you walk in the front door, and there are a bunch of aisles. There's the electrical aisle and the plumbing aisle, and there's the knick-knack aisle, and various others I want you to buy. But they've got it all organized. You have a carpentry problem, you got to fix something. You go to that aisle, and you walk down the aisle. And you ignore most of it. And you get to the part that's interesting, and you pick something that's close enough, and you haul it off to the front, pay for it, and go home, fix the problem. You don't care if what you bought was a hammer, that there are 150 different kinds of hammers. You care even less about how many different kinds of screws there are. If you're not going to use screws, you're going to use nails, or vice versa. What you need is only a few. And so when people ask me, when these guys would go back to their own projects and look, how many heuristics in that long list did they actually use that were effective, and when they started to look at that project, there's a handful. They were doing the hardware store. So you can think of the answers in the back of the book as a hardware store. Now, the first book was organized by chapter, and there are various chapters on everything for how do you detect it, who's an architect and who isn't, all the way to communications and what its problems were, a bunch of different things defining the field. The second one had to do with problems, and its hardware store, if you will, was organized by problem type. And the third one, which is organizations, is organized so that you can use it easily in seeing what problem you have. Are you merging? Are you consolidating? Are you getting rid of things? Are you adding people? Whatever are you doing? And there's a set of pretty good lessons learned for each of these. Depending on what your problem is, you go to the back of the book, you look at that, you have 10 to 12 typically, and people pick 2 or 3. It's all you need at the time. It's good enough. You don't care about the rest. If your system's already underway, you don't have to go back to the conceptualization phase unless you strongly suspect there's something the matter with the system as a whole anyway, and you should have got checked from the beginning to see where the problem was. So, what kind of lessons typically show up? These are typical insights or heuristics. Heuristics is a more formal term. It's been around a little bit longer, but insights is better understood by managers, people like myself. It's an insight. It's a feeling that you've got which looks deeper than the surface. This is the one I told you about. Given an excellent organization, there's some things you can't do. It's quite true. It doesn't say why. As it turns out, the answer is because they've forgotten what their weaknesses and strengths were, particularly the strengths. They've assumed them. The most dangerous possible assumption you can make by any measure is one you didn't state. It was obvious. It was obvious the car should have had tires. You assumed that the car would have tires. But you look carefully at the next car you buy, they don't do it the way they used to. They have certain add-ons, except they aren't add-ons, they're absolute essentials. Like, they don't have any floor mats. That's an extra. Can you believe it? A floor mat's an extra? Instead, you look at this raunchy looking stuff. It doesn't even have something like Toyota, much less Jaguar. Oh no, that's an extra. They're $4,000 worth of extras. Essentials to anybody who's going to drive the car. Too bad. You made the assumption. You made the assumption you were buying an automobile, and you didn't know you weren't buying the whole automobile for the price they stated. Clever jaunt, but anyway. So, if you don't state them, you have to go, in this APL, you have to go way back to the beginning. Why did anybody bother to set up APL? If you're lucky, you have a few old-timers around that maybe can remember. But by now, I'm willing to bet you that the founding principles are so obvious to you that you never think twice about them when you propose for a project. Why are you connected to the Navy? That makes a huge difference. Because what you do next, if it doesn't help the Navy and they're a prime sponsor, oops. There are lots of those. They're buried in your psyche. And the longer you've been here, the deeper they're buried. In that sense, I compliment all of you on having the courage to get somebody from the outside who doesn't know the assumptions and has to try to find them or learn them, and it won't be easy. I had that at aerospace. I had to go back and find out why the hell they set it up. And they set it up for a completely different purpose than what it wound up doing. It was supposed to watch the ballistic missile program. That's the one thing it never did. Great, okay. But a lot of built-ins were into that. And we were supposed to worry about deterrence. And we got in the launch vehicle business, which is related to ballistic missiles, but it's a completely different set of objectives. You hope they aren't launching ballistic missiles with nuclear explosives on the top all the time. We were launching launch vehicles all the time. Okay. Different. Well, so first lesson, got to pay attention to that. And then there's some sub-lessons. What present strengths are future weaknesses? And you have to look at your strengths square in the eye and say, they are good for such and such a thing under the following circumstances. I wonder whether they still are. Do we have the eagle's beak and claws and we're trying to swim? Maybe we shouldn't be swimming. It's a reasonable thought, a good question to ask before you start any design. Are you working in the future environment with strengths that you've long had, but which maybe you don't need for this? The two things you can do: not do the project, or try to do something about the strengths, which may mean you have to tell a lot of other people to go and work in a different area. You may have to tell hardware people to go work in the software area because this is now much more important than it used to be. All kinds of strange things might happen if you go back to your assumptions. You've got to do it. What assumptions are built in, obvious, and hence unstated? There are a slew of them, I'll tell you. I came out of JPL and Aerospace Corporation, similar enough to APL, that I'm willing to bet you there are at least 10. Assumptions which you normally make. Just as I was leaving aerospace, I was asked to write down what the culture of aerospace was all about. It took a lot of hard thought. I think I got them all, but I'm not sure. I wasn't around in the beginning. I came in later. But what we thought were strengths maybe weren't anymore. Certainly congressional support had changed. A lot of other things had changed. Economic viability, that's a peculiarity. The way to find out whether something is economically viable is to ask the questions, as all economists will: who benefits, who pays, who supplies, and who loses? If you haven't answered those questions and you're in the commercial market, you made a terrible mistake. You better figure that out. The question of who supplies is the basic question. Is it private industry, unregulated? Is it public industry, regulated? What is it? Drastically affects the design, drastically affects everything else you can do. If it isn't economically viable in the new environment, you're dead. It may take you time to realize you're dead and buried, but you'll eventually figure it out. When somehow it doesn't make any money, or the stock market walks away, or suddenly you're asked to take a different job, or whatever it turns out to be. Dangerous, very dangerous. Lesson 2. All I've done here is, for the purposes of this talk, I went to the back of the book to the hardware store and picked out a set. If anybody wants to give the same speech again and use a different set, fine. It's good fun. This happened to be the set that was most useful in talking to the director of JPL when they were talking about a lot of terrible problems. This is one of the best. Never assume that the original statement of the problem is the best or even the right one. We're in a tough spot, we in FCRCs, because we get work statements coming down to us: please do this. Sometimes they don't even say please, they just say do this. And it's already called out. They've thought they understood everything. And they thought they knew what the problem was. They can make a terrible mistake. The best example is the F-16. Harry Hilliker of then Fort Worth, must have been GD way back then, was talking to his counterpart, the colonel, about the next airplane. They wanted to make it as simple as possible. Good. Wanted to do a bunch of other things. But the Air Force felt the only way they could do this thing, which was to be a dogfighter, visual dogfighter in Vietnam, that class of problems, which they saw coming up with terrorists and various other stuff. They wanted to have it visual. They recognized that you don't want to shoot down an ally. That's bad news. You can lose a war by doing that in this kind of war. You can't do that. So, okay, it was going to be a visual fighter. Their idea was that in visual fighting, boy, once you've shot your wad, you want to get the hell out of there, so you want to be able to go supersonic. And that was the way to be sure. That was the Air Force idea. So the requirement was a supersonic, simple, one-engine airplane. Except the architect asked enough questions until he finally realized that you can't survive in that environment because a guided missile can catch you no matter how fast you try to drive that airplane. It'll catch you. Supersonic is worthless. But maneuverability is marvelous. Because if you can maneuver inside the turning radius of a high-speed missile, it'll never hit you, which is what you want. If you can maneuver inside the other guy's fighter, you're still better. That was the famous Zeros of World War II. They beat us for a long time because they built a nothing airplane, but boy, its turning radius was almost instantaneous. It was amazing. Maneuverability is what you want. So they concentrated on building a plane which was as maneuverable as possible, which led to the interesting set of scientific results that you had to have the plane and the pilot fail at the same time. Because if they failed at different times, you could have either done more or should have done less, depending upon which one failed. Okay? So they built the F-16, one of the world's most popular airplanes, and it doesn't work in dogfights worth a damn because we don't have any more because the other side figured that out, so now it's used in ground support. Success? Grand success, different problem. Never assume the original is right. Even in the middle of a program, don't assume it. Keep checking. Unless you check, and that's the architect's job, is the original vision still correct? If not, your job is to see what to do about it and recommend or suggest it. I think that's one wrong file. I'm doing better than you thought. Lesson 3. This one I've already talked about. It's simply expressed here. A system's emergent value, remember I said this comes out, somehow emerges from the collection. Emergent value comes from interrelationships among its elements. Gottschalk on lesson 3A has shown, Christina Gottschalk was a candidate for a PhD at USC. She got the candidacy, and what she showed assertively by 47 different examples that no two software architectures can be made to fit together. Now that's a scary one for people in the systems business, because you've got to make them fit together because the architectures of each part came from a different set of software which is connected to the part that you were going to build, which isn't related to any other. Terrible. It says that if the different software architectures are incompatible, so are different languages, by definition. I haven't done the exercise here, but I can tell any one of you here how many languages you know. The minimum number you all know is 15. I'll let you count them afterwards. You can talk to the people that I told that magic to. You know 15 languages. And they're incompatible. It says that a common language is impossible. It goes to the heart of languages, which are to solve problems. And for different problems, you have different languages. Try it out sometime. Everyone's different. I know governmentese, and I know it inside out. It's a very valuable language if you're negotiating with the government. I'll tell you, it isn't worth a damn thing if you're talking to the head of a private industry. They don't understand. However, you still have a matching problem because these different parts have to come together for this end result, and software is getting in your way because the software and the languages can't fit. It says your only hope then is to integrate at the highest level that you can. Be as abstract as you can, and the chance of getting some match then is better. But at the detailed level, give it up. If you're a Boeing and you acquire all these other companies and tell them, oh, you're all going to look like Boeing, shoot the guy. It's a mistake. You can't do it. They're different cultures. They're solving different problems. They're in different stovepipes. They're in different systems. They've developed their own language, their own acronyms, if you will, anything you want to talk about. You got to somehow get all the objectives at whatever level it takes, no matter how high it is, to get them so they all agree on the same thing. We are going to send a man to the moon in the memory of an assassinated president. That was the objective. The first objective under it was, and the whole American public will participate. That led to real-time television. I watched that battle. It almost was lost. The astronauts opposed it bitterly. They didn't want a camera over their shoulder as test pilots looking at what they were doing. They told them, look, we'll go there, we'll take the best pictures you ever saw on video, we'll bring the videos back and you present them. To which the Hollywood reaction immediately was, after the flights, it was all done in a Hollywood set anyway. Grand, no participation. I got the same butterflies everybody else did when they landed on the moon. I've been in it a long time. So emergent value is interrelationships. This is one of the tough ones. I've been telling you that the systems are unprecedented. Okay, you got no data, you got nothing else. Something's going to hit you out of the blue. sometime. The Cold War is going to end. You're going to get married, and the person you married turns out to be somewhat different than what you thought. Call it what you will. You're suddenly hit by a shock. It was completely unexpected. There were no plans for it. What do you do? Don't hear any answers. If I say you prepare for it, you say, how can you prepare for the unpreparable? Because you can't plan for it. What the hell are you going to do? It's going to hit you all at once. If it hasn't hit you guys once already, I'm be surprised. It certainly will in the future. And it'll hit you cold, out of the blue. The Congress suddenly decides to cancel the project on which your whole corporation is dependent because it didn't like, as it's turned out, who the postmistress was in a post office in Maine. I ran into one of those. Irrational. Doesn't make any difference. What do you do? Here you are, you're sitting at Hughes, pick any other company that's gone kaplunk in the meantime. Suddenly hit, blindsided, hopelessly blindsided. That's why I wrote the book. What do you do when you hit the unprecedented? You can't plan for it, you can't analyze it ahead of time. There are no numbers, it's unprecedented, nobody's ever done this before, whether it's a new spacecraft or you're suddenly in global commerce or something, whatever it is. What the hell do you do? And you got 2 weeks. Because Wall Street just decided it for you, perhaps, or the Congress just took a vote, or they didn't take the vote you were depending upon, or some other thing that should never have happened. There are lots of never should have happens in our world. What do you do? How do you prepare for it? Essentially, the answer is you got to pay your dues ahead of time. You got to do a number of things. The most important is know thyself, know the strengths and weaknesses, and know them as cold can be. Do everything conceivable you can to find out about yourselves. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Regardless of what happens later, you've got to know that now, because when these sudden events occur, whatever they are, you'll have no time to go back and look. Don't ask about sending off the 5 of the best people you ever had to go over and suddenly do a study and come back with the right answer. To hell, you don't have a prayer. Suddenly commercialize. Suddenly do everything reusable. Suddenly do this. Never going to play. You'll lose every damn time. Hughes lost. Oh, the list of companies that have lost are sickening. And they're all eagles. And I saw all the eagles die. And it was awful to watch. Worst off all the little eaglets inside. They were having a hell of a time. I have a deep attachment to professionals. And to watch this happening, it's cruel. Good people. Suddenly half of middle management is taken out because some idiot declares that's the way to get efficiency. We've combined 2 companies, we only need half as much administration. Oh, geez. You know, it makes you sick to watch it happen. It's going to happen. So things are going to happen. So you pay your dues ahead of time. What do? Several easy things. First of all, you make very sure you're all talking to each other anyway, fairly routinely. Preferably about things that are changing. So you get used to it. You get used to the idea of change. And you know that change isn't going to hurt, that it'll work itself out, that you can be a part of doing it, that everything's going to be all right, because you're open enough that everybody has talked about it. There's nothing worse than taking an organization that thinks it's got its made forever, and the management which solidifies above it and under it and all the rest of that calcifies, and then you hit it with a change. They're not used to, they don't know how to handle any change, much less the one that's hit them. They haven't any idea why they're so strong. They aren't strong, they're calcified. They're brittle. Wrong answer. So you have to understand yourselves, you have to know yourself, you have to know what you do well, you have to know what you like. If you do those 2, you're going to be all right. But you still have to do something. So in organizational terms, what do I say? Do you have a policy in education which says, we will gladly pay your education if you do something that's related to the company? I think the tax law says so, something, a bunch of these. You probably have that as a policy here. I know very few companies have any other one. You'll be completely unprepared for any other direction, of course. Oops, first indicator. You need to change that policy so that you will permit education in areas the company is not in today, but conceivably could be. In other words, at your periphery. If you have not many software people in it, JPL, okay, and you tell, and they all agree marvelously that the next spacecraft are going to be partners and not robots. So the next major discipline that's going to be important is software. And your strategic plan doesn't have one word in it about software. It doesn't recognize that software as a product line requires an organization appropriate to that product line. What the hell's a hierarchy doing in here? Why do we try to manage software the way we manage hardware? They aren't the same. There is no manufacturer of any consequence. You just grind out tapes or disks or something. That's just farm out. Furthermore, software guys and software companies have no equity. There's nothing they can sell to pay the shareholders. I don't want to scare everybody off the internet, but if you think about it a bit, none of the companies that are having their stock go sailing up would exist if the people and their organizations simply walked off the site. Everything else is leased. There's no equity. They couldn't pay off the shareholders if they had to. Nobody's thought of it. You were investing in the hope of future revenues. You want to talk about speculation? That's a beaut. The whole high-tech industry is largely leased if you're talking software. It has nothing of value but its people, and you can't sell the people. There's a law called the 14th Amendment on slavery, literally, which absolutely prohibits it. If you want to leave tomorrow morning, any one of you, for any reason, you can walk out that door, and that's the end of it. That's this country. You are not assigned that job for life by some government. You can leave. So let's take all the people in this room. For the sake of argument, I'm going to assume that you are the best of the best here. And you all decide, we don't like this facility after all. We're sick and tired of snow or the federal government or anything else. We're going to walk off here, and there's another set of facilities down the road that's just been built by somebody else. We'll lease down there instead. Who is going to sell you or anybody else what? Can't sell you. Can't sell what you know. Can't sell your organization of how you're connected together. As long as you maintain that, you are the company, and that is not for sale, and it cannot be. Interesting. So what do we do to prepare? To get back to this subject, I diverge every once in a while. The next thing, I told you about education. Make it a little more flexible. Give yourself a few more options. Suppose you have to go in a new direction. Wouldn't it be helpful if some of your people had at least explored the area, even when it didn't seem to be directly relevant to today's problems? Wouldn't that be helpful? Wouldn't it be helpful if some of the younger people in particular, who are computer literate, had deeply explored the possibilities of what that could do in other parts of the business? Had all kinds of ideas like partnership spacecraft instead of robots, much less things that just go crunch, okay? What about Surveil spacecraft? Surveil spacecraft, by definition, have no mechanical parts. Could you ever do that? Is that possible? What's this different kind of research? If you're going to do man in space, God help you, I don't think you should, but if you wanted to do man in space, ask yourself why. As an architect, if you look at the space station, you know ahead of time it's not going anyplace. It can't go anyplace. No purpose and there's no objective. There's no scientific purpose. That long since is washed out. There's no real purpose because we're never going to send people to the moon for at least 50 years. We can't. You have to go with nuclear propulsion. Studies have shown that, absolutely. You can only stay there 2 months. If you don't come back right away, you won't get back because you can't live there for 2 years, which is the next easy time to get back. But basic problems, basic problems. Today, I discovered in the Los Angeles Times, NASA is thinking about sex aboard the spacecraft, as though it didn't exist or never would. That you put men and women in the same closed compartment for 2 years and nothing happens? Well, I don't know what world they lived in, but it sure as hell isn't ours. You're going to have problems, and deep problems, and severe problems. They can kill the mission. These kinds of things, you try to think ahead. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Could you handle that problem if it was given to you? If not, that whatever strengths you had don't apply there. Don't go try swimming. Maybe not a very good idea anyway, that's what I'm saying. Now, some of these are kind of nasty comments because I'm leaping ahead to some of the examples where some fairly simple insights in structures and system architecting will tell you one whale of a lot because they make you ask questions of yourself. So this one is a good one. Be prepared. What are you doing in research? Are you allowed to do research at the periphery? Are you allowed to do research in some damn fool idea? Is your IR&D such that you can indeed do anything you want, and it's not IR&D for the same outfit that gave you the money as R&D percentage? These kinds of things you have to have if in the future you're going to have the options available. There's nothing worse than getting in a situation with no options because you haven't even looked for them before, much less set them up. At Aerospace, we deliberately studied what would happen to us. Didn't happen while I was there, it happened later. If suddenly the Congress decided that you were an unnecessary evil instead of a necessary one, okay? And so they decided to whack at you 10%, kind of indefinitely. And we ran it out. The answer was, if we have an 18-month notice, it's no sweat. We can probably negotiate that. We could probably handle it for at least 5 years. And we knew exactly how and exactly why and what it would cost us, almost down to the point where we could say which individuals we have to encourage to go someplace else, in which case we had to know where they might go and have a decent chance. We'd work the whole scenario. It wasn't a worst case. It was a fairly well-expected one. You're going to get hit. Now, if they hit us 30% in 1 year with no notice, that's harder. So we set up our profit. You all make a profit. Nonprofits, saying in a nonprofit, forget something very, very basic. We are all profit makers. The nonprofits simply pile it back into the business with our consent. As far as I'm concerned, that's the wisest possible way of using a profit, but personal. So this one says there are a lot of things you can do. To survive a radical change, pay your dues ahead of time in R&D, education, compensation, and above all, encourage innovation as a way of life. Encourage people to think about new ideas and change all the time. Even if you think it's a waste of time, how else might you use it? You know, just get together over a bridge game, or we used to do over string quartets. But, you know, get together and puzzle about, hey, what ifs? It's fun. It's good fun. Get used to it. Because then when the time comes when suddenly your top management turns to you and say, what are we going to do about this? There's some guy that's been thinking about it. He says, well, you can do this or this or this or this. Don't try that one. That's a mistake. Yeah, we've been thinking about that. And all you want is some new ideas? Well, give us a week. And either send us off or lock us in a room, whatever you want to do. But give us about a week. We'll come up with ideas all over the place. If you're good at doing that, if you're used to it, but you innovate all the time, you innovate in business administration, you innovate in any one of your stovepipes, you're just thinking about doing something new or different, sort of for the hell of it. You are far better prepared for that sudden shock. I'll tell you, you certainly are. You have somebody, maybe 4 levels down, doesn't make any difference where they are in the organization. If they're willing to stand up and say, hey, I got some bright ideas, management then has a prayer. Of course, the immediate thing you need to do, having established all those things, innovation at HP was certainly a way of doing business. They stood all kinds of shocks. Outside economic shocks never fazed them. Some whole products line disappeared, never fazed them. Nothing ever fazed them. They innovated all the time. Didn't know how to collect them together, to build systems, but they could indeed innovate. If you want some new products, I bet they could think up, say they have only 5,000 now, they could probably think up 100 in a couple of weeks as to what they could do next, with their strengths and all the good stuff. So if you've done your homework ahead of time, if the company policies are set so that you're going to innovate, you're going to educate, you're going to do your R&D, no matter how small it is, that you're going to encourage people to innovate, just as a basic idea, you will be far better prepared. And if you're talking to each other, you are best, because then the company can afford to come to you. I know as a CEO, I do the same thing. I'd come to you and say, look, we got a problem. It's pretty serious. The Congress has decided we aren't worth a damn. It's a serious problem. We may have to look elsewhere. Anybody got any ideas? And if within 15 minutes people didn't start standing up, I know I had failed. If they're used to it, strange people may stand up. They may be funny-looking characters with pigtails. I don't know what they're going to be looking like, but they'll have been thinking. And you've been encouraging them to think. You want to squash them. You want to squash people into a system engineering mold when you desperately needed just a few system architects. Okay? You allow them enough freedom that they're used to it. And motion is not something which hits them and makes them brittle. It makes them flexible. Yeah, sure. We've done this before. Remember the last time? Kind of stories you need. And the final one here. and vice versa. This says the architecture of an organization should fit that of the product line it supports. You can also say that the product line should fit the organization. The two have to fit together. There's nothing worse than taking an organization which is a misfit to the product line because it came from outside and was superimposed for any reason you want. You have to match your product line. Now, you're pretty well organized for that because you call them stovepipes, but actually they're projects. There's specific goals in specific places. You mostly, as I understand it, you don't need to talk to each other much. That's good organizationally. You have a topside organization which should add value. If it doesn't add value, you don't need it. That's the simple criterion. But if it's there and you're good and it's working, for anybody to come in and say, let's just slice this out, has to answer a question. What value were they adding and where is it now being supplied? Unfortunately, it usually percolates up. It creates what I call a king's court. I had to abolish it at aerospace. It got in the way because it confused people as to what their responsibility was because you didn't know. So the architecture should fit. And that's why I brought up the question of software. If your product line is software or a major part of your division is doing software, what's the organization that fits that? I don't know. If I knew, I'd give you a few clues or something, but I don't know. It's a strange one. I don't know how to match an organization to a spiral. I know very easily how to do it in the step-by-step process of a waterfall. You can set up a special organization for each one. Works pretty well. You got to worry about throwing stuff over the interface. Okay, so it's a problem so that it's solvable. But what do you do in software? How do you deal with a customer that's never organized that way anyway? How do you get all these things to fit? And you can't say, well, throw out the software. Software is the future. Software soon is going to have members on your board. And not very long after that, within 20 years, don't be surprised if the chairman of the board is a software guru. Don't be surprised. The shift between simple mechanical devices and smart devices is so profound that it's going to go anywhere because it produces so much value at so little cost. When HP transferred from simple instruments to smart instruments, they immediately made a 20% profit. They brought the cost down by 20% and increased the performance by a factor of 5 simultaneously. Those smart instruments were worth so much more to the customer. The fact that you could charge them a small premium was inconsequential. They didn't even do that. They cut the price. Why? Because software is cheap to add. Very, very cheap. And it adds so much to the operational capability of the instrument that it makes money hand over fist for that client. A smart instrument which will take a set of stuff that you have to measure, instead of having a PhD standing there trying to read the instrument and write numbers, high error rate. Instead, you go to a computer and type in the program that you want run. You have the final report all written except for a few gaps, and it fills in the gaps and prints the report for you. Think of the savings at one step. All you have to know is be smart enough to know what program you want run. You push the button, it goes zzz, bang, out comes the report. You know that all parts are right. That's worth so much money that who the hell cares the cost of the electrical device that happened to do it? So, important. The organization has to fit. I don't know how to do that. And I told you so. Well, my final part was going to be on various applications to tell you predictable things in the future and which ones I predicted before that turned out right. I've forgotten all the ones I did wrong. And tell you why these things work and why they do, and why you can treat organizations as systems, and why given a system you can apply these rules by going to the hardware store. It's not very difficult. It is hard to be an architect. I'll tell you, it's very hard to be an architect. You cannot be a project engineer if you're an architect. You cannot do R&D if you're an architect. All these come out of the conflict of interest rules of architecting. You have to be extremely careful. You have to be willing to suppress your own desire for publicity in 15 minutes in the sun and all the rest of that jazz. So that the customer does that. That's who you're working for. No matter what company you're in, you have to remember you're working for the client, and the company must remember it too. Because the guy that comes in here and tells the company president, sorry, but you're going to have to tell the warranty change, you're going to have to do this. I'll tell you, you get kicked out of the office. It can be unpleasant at times. You can never make value judgments. You can never make judgments of what's something worth. You instead facilitate, if you will, call it any number you want. You get it so that different pieces will fit together and produce something nobody ever could have done otherwise. And then you can run the world, and it's fun as long as you're in the back seat. But if you demand to be in the front seat driving the car, it won't work. End of the lecture.